Once you've settled into your engagement, it's time to actually start wedding planning. But you can't plan a wedding without a budget. Weddings often come with sticker shock, so we're here with Laura Maddox of Magnolia Celebrates to make sure your budget expectations match the reality of things.
Laura has spent the last decade plus curating life's most exciting moments for her clients. She's gotten wine, blood, dirt, and more out of wedding dresses. That sounds like a story. And helped countless brides find their perfect team for their big day. We're so excited to have you here today, Laura. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is a lot of fun.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about your company and what makes you guys different.
Sure. So Magnolia Celebrates used to be Magnolia Events and Planning, and we rebranded about 2 years ago. But we've been in the market, in the Atlanta market, since 2004. And we've always branded ourselves as Magnolia. Oh, go get any one of the Magnolia girls. Any one of them is going to serve you so well. But we've taken a lot of pride in that. And we've built a really great reputation in town of being very respectful of budgets, while also finding really creative ways to make your event special for you.
That's awesome.
And yeah, we do mostly weddings. We also do mitzvahs, the occasional baby shower, bridal shower, corporate event. So we're well-rounded, but mostly weddings.
That's awesome. And I feel like you have some good stories. We're going to have to get on another later episode and talk about all those.
Before we do, I do want to hear at least one.
At least one of
wine, blood, dirt, and more. I mean, you need to elaborate at least with one story because couples love hearing those. What's your favorite one where you've gotten something out of a dress?
Probably the wine. How do you get red wine out of a wedding dress? This groom, they were at their sweetheart table. The reception had just, gotten underway. We had just done all the spotlight dances, the welcome toast. Everybody sat down for their salads. The groom accidentally reached across the table and just spilled his wine glass all over her. And so it hit not just her chest, but all the way into her lap. It was all over her dress. It was bad. But luckily she comes running out immediately. And we, between a combination of these crazy wipes I have and Tide stick and baby powder, we got the vast majority of the stain out.
Baby powder?
Yeah. So that's my little secret is once you get so I have these things called LOC wipes, and they're first, and they're a special wipe, and they're a lot softer to things like wedding dresses, which are a special material. But I've gotten coffee out of my white pants on Easter Sunday, kind of thing. So they're incredible. But so you use those first and you get the area really saturated with that. And then you take the Tide stick and, go if you need to with that. The Tide is just a little bit harsher on that really gentle material. So I try not to use it if I don't have to. But then while it's wet, you take baby powder and you do a very light dusting of baby powder over the area. You don't want it to cake on there. You want it to just sort of sit as if you were doing dry shampoo in your hair or something. You want it to just kind of sit in the area. And that white of the baby powder sort of masks the stain for you for the rest of the day. Between, using the wipes and getting the majority of the stain out and then whatever's left over, the baby powder sort of takes over for.
That is awesome.
And that right there, people. That's why you hire a
planner.
That's why you hire
a planner. That's amazing.
On top of all the amazing tips we're about to hear about.
All right, so let's get to the topic at hand as we really talk about expectations versus reality with budget planning. So we'll first kind of focus on the prioritizing. So how should this is great. I've got two planners. This doesn't happen.
You ready to actually take notes on this episode?
I'm actually just going to take notes and listen because I'm not going to contribute much here.
Last time he took just mental notes, but maybe he's got the pen out this time.
Yeah, that's right. I've got two pens, multicolored, old school, elementary school.
He's ready to go.
We're good. All right. So how should, it would be fun if you guys disagreed or something.
Oh, wow.
Oh, wow. This would get intense.
Salty.
Uh-oh. All right. So how should couples decide what's most important? Go.
Sammy, do you want to go first?
No, you got it.
Okay. Sorry. I'm trying to make y'all big screen. There we go. Okay. I personally think that it's all about your own priorities. So you have to decide what's most important. If food is really important to you as a couple, then food's going to be important to you on your wedding day. If, photography is really important to you, then photography is going to be really important to you on your wedding day. But so some people could care less about the food, and some people could, that is the one thing that they want to focus on. I have parents that care deeply about the wine. I have others that say we can do well liquor and have no wine for all I care.
Oh, no wine.
So really, I know, it's a little crazy. But I usually tell them, you still need to have wine.
Yeah.
Some variation, please.
Yeah. There's got to be some wine there. But my answer is, the long and the short of my answer is that you have to decide that. I can't tell you where your priorities lie.
Yeah. And don't you think that's like such
I don't
a
know,
key...
Tammy, do you agree?
Yeah, I 100% agree. That's like a key part of that like budget conversation that you need to have in the beginning is like what is important to you.
Right.
Because if it's really important for you to have this like over the top invitation that's not going to, be $5 a piece, is going to cost you a lot more, So you have to have that conversation, and that helps to kind of set your budget.
And that's so important that's why you should have a planner too, because when you go to, and it's actually intentional why bustld doesn't have that sort of budget calculator sort of thing, because everyone's priorities are different and a planner can help guide you there. But if you want to spend half your budget on a photographer or a planner, then that's what's important.
Yeah.
Have at it.
We always talk about, we had a designer when we first started, and she had a $10,000 wedding budget and spent $5,000 on a photographer because photos and stuff were, and honestly, like the photos it made her $10,000 wedding look like, a $70,000 wedding, when the photos came back. So I think like things like that, it just matters what's important to you. Yeah, for sure. So absolutely. What are your tips on how to like divvy that budget up?
Well, so I know you just mentioned the budget calculators, but if you're not working with me, which if you're working with me, then I'm going to do a budget for you and I will help you. I'll give you, first off, here's a budget if nothing was a priority, and then let's play with the numbers and find out, where your priorities lie. But if you aren't working with me, then I say do the same thing. Find your budget calculator and put in your budget and figure that out, and then adjust it based on your priorities. Don't just take their budget and run with it as if you have no choice in the matter. Because just like you said, there are people out there where, you're going to spend double on your photography budget, but then you don't care about food, or you don't care about, I've had brides with $150,000 budgets that have spent $1,000 on their wedding dress because it's just not their priority.
Right.
So
I agree. I think it doesn't matter. It doesn't actually matter what your budget is. You should just divvy that budget up accordingly based on your priorities, and don't spend money on something just because you think you should, or, because, you feel like, oh, I need to have a nice dress, so I'm going to spend a lot of money on it. If it's not a huge priority to you, then don't bother, save that money and put it towards something that does matter. I think that's hugely important.
Yeah.
So and I've seen this happen with you, Sammy, and Laura, I'm sure you've seen the same. Basically, if you have a longer engagement, you start planning, you get into the weeds of it, you set your budget, everything's kind of moving along. Halfway through it, again, maybe it's a long budget, or maybe just tastes change or priorities change. If you're halfway through, can you reprioritize your budget halfway through?
Not really. I mean, you can rethink your decor. You can rethink the food that you're serving. But once you've given deposits and signed contracts, it's really hard to reprioritize your budget. Especially because when you're signing these contracts, you are signing that you're going to move forward with them. And let's take decor, for example. So your flowers and your rentals and your et cetera. If you're hiring a company that's doing it all, then, it's all encompassing. But even if you're just talking flowers, you are signing that you're working with this florist, but you're also signing that you're going to spend a certain amount of money with this florist. And that florist is depending on that money for that weekend and basing how many jobs she's taking throughout the year and the month and that weekend based on what you have signed to spend. So typically speaking, they also have a clause in their contract that says you can change anything you want until I order the flowers, but you have to stay within a certain minimum. And the same thing is going to happen with your caterer. The same thing is going to happen with any vendors where your pricing may fluctuate based on your guest count or based on other parameters. Somebody like your photographer, that's not ever going to change. Once you sign for the $5,000 photographer, it's $5,000. You can't go back to them and say, well, we need to reprioritize our budget.
Right.
So, I mean, you can, but you're not going to save a ton of money.
Right.
And you're not going to have a whole lot of movement.
Yeah, I think a lot of times at that point, if you're trying to reprioritize, you've probably overspent on those early pieces. And so if design or flowers or things like that were important to you, now your budget's just kind of gotten chopped because of that. So it can be hard because maybe flowers were actually really important to you. So I think that's why it's so important to prioritize in the beginning and make sure you allot enough money for the things that are important, because it's really hard. I think that's probably one of the hardest challenges as a planner is when people come to you and have already spent a decent portion of their budget and are like, I want to stay on budget, but I need to, the last couple of things are really important to me. And it's like, you have to kind of deliver that news like, well, we're either going to have to get more money or we're going to have to cut here. And I think that's like a really hard conversation to have.
It never goes over well.
No, it's not fun.
And there was one time where I presented a budget, and it was actually at the beginning, but I still presented the budget, and the parents had such sticker shock. They were like, this can't be true. You need to come in. You need to meet with us. And I remember I was very pregnant at the time with my first child, and they knew that, of course, and whatnot. But I walk into their house and I go through the entire budget, and I have the data to back everything up that I said. And in the end, the dad just looked at me and he was like, well, I'm not happy about it, but I can't be mad at a pregnant person. So I guess I'm just not going to be happy about it. I was like, okay.
I'll take it.
We can still adjust, but this is what it's going to be based on your, what you said that you want.
Yeah. Yes. 100%. I love that. Can't be mad at a pregnant person.
Can't be mad at a pregnant person. Like, okay. But in the end, he's definitely appreciated, and I still get business from that family, referral business from that family, because he appreciated so much that I was just honest and upfront with him from the beginning of, this is what you're looking at. It's very easy for a planner, I think, sometimes to be like, oh no, we can totally do that. That's totally fine. And then let the other teams be the bad guy and be the ones that are going over budget, or, it's just easy for it to not be your fault. But if you're honest and upfront from the beginning, then I feel like the entire thing the entire process is a lot easier.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that
I might have gone off on a tangent.
No, that's great. I think honestly, it's so important to set those expectations in the beginning. We were just saying that in the last episode, but setting those expectations and letting them know, like, this is what you asked for. That's what this costs. We can still make adjustments if you haven't signed contracts. Like, let's cut back somewhere and get on budget. But if you want what you asked for, this is what it's going to cost. And that is another,
Well, and and then if you haven't sent save the dates or invitations, then you can reprioritize your guest list if you want, because you're, and I know this is a question for later, but your biggest driver of cost is your guest count.
Yep.
So if you're planning for 300 people and you want to make it a $10,000 wedding for 300 people, I'm sorry, my friend, you're going to be serving like a $2 a person meal, or you're going to be finding a way to not give them food. So, there are definitely ways to reprioritize that they're much more creative, and nobody likes talking about them.
No.
Because it is like, cut your guest list.
Yes. Yeah. I say that all the time.
Guest list, lose your deposit.
Yes. You heard it from Laura too. It's not just me.
You're not the only bad guy.
I'm not the only bad guy saying that.
Right.
Thank you for backing me up.
Yeah. So then I think that's a good segue then too. So talking about cost. So obviously guest count is one of the things that really drives it. Or anything else you guys want to highlight besides guest count?
Well, I think your taste level also drives it a lot. So, if you're okay with having like a backyard casual, wedding, that's, you know, kind of like paper plates and things like that, then that's going to drive your budget versus wanting to have like a over the top, you know, black tie event at the, you know, the nicest venue in town. Like, don't you think?
Right.
Yeah. So that taste level.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, yes. And and then it all goes back to your taste level, but your venue choice, your even your food choice, do you want a seated plated dinner or do you want a station style dinner? There's a misconception that a station style dinner is going to be less expensive, when in reality there's no control over food costs, so the caterers actually charge more for it. And you know, there's a lot of little things like that, but I think, yes, it ultimately comes down to, are you trying to do a champagne wedding on a Pabst Blue Ribbon budget, or do you have the champagne money?
Yep.
Or, you know, is your guest count so high that, you know, you're outpacing your money?
Yeah, I think that's great.
And I'm sounding like a bad guy a lot. So, you know, oftentimes.
No, you can have everything you want.
Do work out.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right. We can make them work out. It's a conversation for the beginning.
Yeah. I think if you have all those conversations in the beginning, then you can make it work throughout the planning process. Mm-hmm. But you just got to know what you're getting yourself into, so that it's not, because it is sticker shock. You most likely haven't dealt with a budget for a wedding. You know?
There's no context.
There's no context. Right. Yeah, you got to know what things cost, which is hard. So I mean, yeah.
Right.
So what should this is gonna be a hard question to answer. So I'm curious what you all say.
Right.
So what should couples expect to spend on their wedding?
Well, so I saw that in the pre-show notes, and I was like, I can't answer that. I'm not answering that for you. Because, I was like, pass. Because honestly, your budget is, I don't know. In first grade, they told me that a paragraph is as long as a string. And that has always stuck with me, because your wedding budget is as long as a string. Like, you get to decide. You get to decide if you want to spend, you know, $13 at the county courthouse to get a marriage license and then go get married. You know, we just went to Savannah for a planning weekend, and we saw a couple literally walk into Forsyth Park with a officiant of some sort, get married, just the two of them and the officiant, and like, I think they had a witness, and then leave. And that was their wedding. Yeah. We're like, okay, you know, you can do it. So you can decide, you want to do that, or do you want to have 300 of your closest friends at the St. Regis in Atlanta with a $60,000 food and beverage minimum, and then you sure as heck want to put some decor in there because you are at the St. Regis. So, you know, it's beautiful by itself, but you still want to look like you belong at the St. Regis.
Yes.
I love that answer, because I think a common thing that couples get hung up on is averages, right? And it's kind of a trap question, but like when you see like the wedding report puts out, you know, that about the average wedding is like around 30,000 or so a year, or 30,000 for the wedding. But what they're not saying is that, again, about 40% of those are courthouse or going into a park and things like that. So that's really baked in there too. So it's an average is
skewed.
Exactly. Yeah. So
averages are hard.
I love that answer.
Right.
Yeah.
Anything you want to add there, Sammy?
No, I think that's great. And also keeping in mind that you kind of touched on it already, but the cost you're looking at is really cost per guest. So that guest count is really increasing that cost a lot. So I think that's great.
Well, and I think that's actually a really great way of putting it. And there's very few people that have really done that math recently. And it's very hard to tell your clients that, like, hi, so you should expect to spend, you know, $500 per guest. And they look at you like you've just told them they're insane. But then at the same time, or you know, they look at you like you have 6 heads. But then at the same time, if you divide that guest count by the round number budget that they gave you, then you're like, we said the same thing.
Yep.
We did. But you just didn't like the way I said it, you know?
we said the same thing for sure.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's a huge piece of it. And it does make you sound a little like jaded, in the sense I'm always like, well, if you can cut a few people, you know, and it's like, that is hard. These are your people. But when you're looking at $500 a head, you start wondering, like, how much are you, my people? Who are you going to make that list?
Well, yeah. So. And I mean, it's a fair question. We talk a lot about, you know, if you haven't talked to this person in the last year, They don't need to be on your guest list. I don't care if you are the best of Facebook liking buddies. Like, if they like every single one of your pictures and you like every single one of theirs, but you haven't physically talked to the person, picked up the phone, or seen their face in a year, they don't need to come to your wedding.
They don't.
Yeah.
Yeah. Make it.
And again, I'm the bad guy.
I know. So what do you think that couples, and I know it's so priority driven, but what do you think couples can expect to spend the most on overall for their wedding?
I always say food and beverage.
Yeah.
And food and beverage followed closely with flowers and decor.
Yeah, I think I would agree.
And it's again your drivers, but also those are the major factors, right? And it may be different in a smaller budget arena. I typically deal with $100,000 to $250,000, depending on where in my career. But yeah, I mean, in that world, you're spending a lot on your photographers and on your invitations and on all of the other things, but still the vast majority of the budget gets allocated for your food and beverage.
Yeah.
And then closely followed by flowers and draping and couches and chairs and stage surrounds,
all the pretty
and
things,
dance floors, and I love it. It is so much fun. But yeah,
it comes with a price tag. Yeah,
and a lot of people think that the decor does get driven by your guest count because you're talking about decorating tables, but there's still in this luxury world, there's also still this like minimum cost, right? Because my clients are all going to want some sort of stage surround. They're not going to want the black skirting on the stage. So you're paying for that regardless of if you have 20 guests or 100 guests. And it's going to cost the same amount regardless of if you have 20 guests or 100 guests. And so there's a piece of decor that doesn't get driven by your guest count, but whereas catering is all driven by your guest count. But
yeah, I think that's
I'm now rambling.
No, that's a really great tip. So, and a great segue too into like talking about where you should splurge versus where you should save. And I think, no matter where your budget is at, you're still, some places you're going to splurge and some places you're going to want to save because it goes back to those priorities.
Right.
So what would you say are the things worth upgrading?
So going back to the very beginning of our conversation, it's all about your priorities. But, and so my priorities may be different than your priorities, but I always tell people that the area I would splurge is on your photography and perhaps videography, if videography is important to you. They're the only pieces of this wedding that you will take with you after the wedding is over. And so I think that those are the pieces worth spending the money on. That day is worth documenting well. So those are my priorities.
Yeah, I agree. I think good photo and good video, you can't beat that. And I think so many people debate around video.
Yeah.
I know we did.
Video is my most important thing.
And I'm glad that we, so glad that we splurged to have that because it's something that you can't get back either, once you don't do it. So I think that is super important. What about things you think to save on?
So this probably sounds very dated, but your ceremony. I don't feel you need to spend a whole lot of money on your ceremony. I address it, make it beautiful, but when it comes to the decor and the programs and just the things having to do with the ceremony, it should really be about your union and not necessarily everything around it. And then also it's 30 minutes of your entire day. Mm-hmm. And so all of that money, unless you can reuse it for the reception, that money is spent for the smallest portion of the day.
We're laughing because you're literally a girl after my own heart. Because like we just did a episode on ceremonies two episodes ago, and I said the exact same thing.
Yep.
And we joked that like the first thing you think about with a wedding is the reception, and then the ceremony is kind of an afterthought.
Even though
it shouldn't be
what you're here for.
But the design portion of it, I agree. You're there for such a short period of time. Either reuse it or save there.
Right. And then other things are, don't spend money on a specialty cocktail. If you can't negotiate it in from the beginning, don't do it. You don't do a champagne toast. Nobody drinks the champagne. Have it on the bar if somebody wants it. Just little things like that. My big one is the ceremony.
I love that.
That reminds me of at our wedding a few moons ago. But when we did have a specialty cocktail, but it was like a bourbon red wine type thing. And I just remember one of our guests just swinging the drink around, and Sammy's eyes getting bigger and bigger.
We needed Laura.
We needed Laura to come and get that.
It didn't pour, but Ryan was like, "Can you back up?"
Yeah, can you stop waving your arms?
I love you, but you gotta back up.
Oh my God. Oh, wow.
All right. So a few top tips. So you said on places to splurge and save, but if you're designing on a budget, where are the things that you would, put your money, and where are the things you would save? So what are things to think about when you're designing on a budget?
Yeah. So if you're designing on a budget, I always say pick one place in the room that you really want to make a powerful statement in, and then go understated everywhere else. Let people's eyes go there, because truthfully, people are going to take pictures of your wedding, but mostly they're going to take pictures of the thing that they're most impressed with. So let everybody be most impressed with the same thing, and you'll get a lot of pictures of your room, but they'll also, you haven't spent a ton of money on it. Go with candles instead of a lot of flowers. Do not do floating candles, because the labor involved in moving the floating candles actually up to your fees.
Where's the water come from?
Yeah, I don't think people realize that. That's a really good tip. Floating candles are pricey and a lot of work.
Right. And I don't know about up there, but in Atlanta, every candle has to be enclosed in glass. So your taper candles still involve glass around them, or even your pillar candles. But that is still a whole lot less expensive than your floating candles all the way down your aisle, or your floating candles on your centerpieces, because that's even more time consuming and challenging. So it's just that labor piece that gets increased, and then you don't see it in the centerpiece necessarily, but you're going to see it on your bottom line. And then, do a seated plated dinner. If it's not important to you which way, do a seated plated dinner. It's going to save you a little bit of money. You do chicken instead of beef. Pick one entree and then have a vegetarian option. Or if you have the money, do a duet option, which is, beef and fish, or beef and chicken, or chicken and fish. But simplicity is always going to be the way to save some money.
Yeah, I think that's a really great tip. And I love it. I mean, personally, I love it when couples kind of, if they're on a budget, really put a lot into their head table or something like that, because I feel like that can just make such a huge statement, and you can really simplify everything else. So I think that's great.
Yeah, I think you said something earlier in the conversation, but that stations end up costing more. To me, in my mind, not being the planners that y'all are, that sounds counterintuitive. I would think stations would be less expensive than plated. Plated sounds more formal to me.
Yeah.
So I think that's really good advice.
Right. Like a common misconception.
Yeah.
All right, Laura, if you had to pick one thing to splurge on, budget was not an issue, what would be that one thing that you would tell your clients to splurge on?
I'd still go back to photography and videography.
Yeah.
I know that's two things, but I'd rope them together.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Those would be my splurge.
I agree.
Followed very closely for a third by some flowers, just because I love decorating and having the really beautiful, amazing decor. But, I always tell my clients, your priorities become my priorities. So if it's not your priority, then fine.
There you go. I like that. Yep. It's their wedding. So whatever their priorities are, I love that.
Right.
Yeah. Those, I would say, and lighting. That's another one that's top up there for me, is lighting can make a big difference.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. That'd be another top.
It really can. And yes, exactly. And you're absolutely right. You put all of this beautiful decor in the room. We're going to get some great pictures for our websites and whatnot beforehand, because we can have the lights a little higher during cocktail hour while you're out there, or earlier in the day. But, your guests aren't going to see what you have put all this effort and all this money into if you don't light it.
Yeah. I agree.
So, besides Bustld, as we kind of close out, so besides Bustld, tell us where our listeners can find you.
So we're on all the wedding websites, but mostly Instagram, Facebook, and then our website itself. So magnoliacelebrates.com, and then at Magnolia Celebrates everywhere else. We don't have a Twitter, but we have Pinterest, Facebook, and Instagram.
Awesome.
Perfect.
Well, thank you so much for being with us here today. We are super excited and can't wait to share all your great tips with our listeners.
Well, thank you. This was a lot of fun.
Thanks.
Thanks.